our last module, the gold star or the best practice is off-road. We certainly know the riding community prefers to just be as far away as possible from the carriageway. We're unable to achieve that. We're going to discuss, well, how can we manage safe cycling connections that are on road, so on the carriageway itself. So that's going to be the focus of today. Just a reminder also, please pop in any questions that you would like answered, either by Ainsley or myself, in the Q&A, and then any general chats or sharing your own perspectives, you can leave that in the chat. So 2 different avenues for you there, just a reminder. I had this shared by a participant of a shared path near to their home, and you can see it's been narrowed in to clearly accommodate for the signposts, and they're using line marking there to, I suppose, delineate that bit of a hazard. It's by no means best practice there and not really in a good spot at all. But another photo that I thought was worth sharing was this terrific little example of a shared path. And I think if you've ever got the stencil of the pedestrian and the bicycle symbol and it doesn't fit on the shared path, that should be ringing alarm bells that perhaps this is not an appropriate spot for a shared path. So I have no idea how this one got the tick of approval, but yeah, interesting example. Okay, one other thing I just wanted to mention is we talked about how we can manage cyclist speeds as they're approaching pedestrian areas and something like that. I spoke about the use of zebra crossings, providing that across the bicycle facility. That is the case here. So you can see there is a zebra crossing that's been installed, as well as the associated pedestrian walking feet signage. So this is like a legal pedestrian crossing, zebra crossing. And to manage the speeds for bike riders before they get to that, they've installed these transverse pavement bars, or rumble strips, you might also call them. It's actually made of a different material, and it has like the slightest of lips. Like it sits about 1 or 2 mil proud of the adjacent surface, which means as you ride over it, you get this haptic warning. Okay, the word haptic just means like it's a vibration feeling in the handlebars, so you can feel like something is going on. Another way that you can kind of manage that risk of potential collisions with pedestrians. Alrighty, for those that did manage to have a look at our 360-degree video, you would have experienced 2 different shared path crossings. We've got example 1 here on the left and example 2 on the right. Marissa, we can start the day by launching a poll, and we'll get some immediate feedback of how people found riding through these 2 scenarios. So the question we want you to answer is, which example do you believe shows best practice design for a shared path crossing over a road? I'll give you 20 seconds to have a go at that. You're not marked on this poll, so we're not taking any records of this. We just want to see what the current sentiment is like. Which example shows best practice for the shared path crossing over the road? Okay, I'll give you another 5 seconds. Don't get too stressed. 100% sure. And we might just end the poll there and share with the group. Marissa, please. And okay, I'm seeing vast majority saying example 1, which I tend to agree. And the reason for that is because we've got the raised crossing point. So we love to see that raised crossing point. It reduces the vehicle speeds makes them much more likely to yield, and it awards the priority for bike riders, so they don't need to slow down and give way to traffic. Example 2 is the opposite, where the priority is given to general traffic, meaning they actually have to pause here, grab the rail, the shared path ends, check if there's a gap in traffic before heading over and completing that connection. So much prefer to see example 1, where it's the raised crossing point and the priority is awarded to vulnerable road users. No Wally for today. Unfortunately, our little friend is just stuck in the burrow and didn't make a presence in today's slides. So don't strain your eyes looking for Wally, because Wally is not here. We'll instead talk through what the assessment is at the end of the session. Okie dokie. Today's agenda is, as I mentioned, going to be focused on road cycling facilities. We're going to spend quite a bit of time speaking about this idea of a protected bicycle lane. It's often referred to as a separated bicycle lane as well. There's a few different terms out there, cycle tracks, these types of things. We'll talk about the 2 main configurations, which is a one-way separated path or a 2-way separated path. And we'll also have a chat around what type of separators can be used, because there's a myriad of products out there that can facilitate that separation. And yeah, it's common within industry just to associate, the Copenhagen bicycle lane design, like that's what the protected bicycle lane is, but it's scalable and it doesn't always have to be such an expensive endeavor. So we'll go through those types of products. Then we'll talk about, okay, if we're unable to achieve that protection, what other, treatment possibilities are there? And that's when really we need to be thinking about the dooring risk and what that means for the cycling community. Basically, when you're not talking about protected facilities, all it comes down to is line marking, and line marking is not really enough to provide that separation. But we did want to go through some pragmatic ways where line marking has been used to help improve the level of safety, but certainly to not the same extent that the protected facilities would offer. Finally, we'll close on areas where we actually might mix the traffic. So commingling bike riders and general traffic, and basically letting a bike rider claim the traffic lane and ride right in the middle of the traffic lane, as opposed to being pushed to the curbside. We'll talk about when that may be appropriate and how that kind of idea needs to be supported with local area traffic management treatments, just to ensure that operating speeds remain low. To get the ball rolling, I've just got an image here of a protected bicycle lane. And this example, I think, is quite a good case study and worth replicating in future projects. The reason I say that, this is a busy commuter corridor into Melbourne CBD as well. And I realise I said that last module, but this is coming north-south into the city. And very, very popular, but also attracts a range of riders, not just, commuters. It's also got kids going to primary school and things like that. And what I think is really clever about the way that this specific facility has been designed is the width that they have opted for is not the minimum, nor is it the desirable. It's closer to that, maximum, or closer to that shared path width that would be facilitating two-way direction. The reason I think that's such a good solution in this case is because we've got that high volume of cycling traffic, and we've also got that diverse skill range within this area. you do get lots of slow riders and you do get lots of fast riders. And if this was narrowed to that kind of 1.2 meter minimum width for these types of facilities, it only allows for one cyclist to travel in the same direction at a time with no opportunities for overtaking. So if you're stuck behind a slow cyclist, you're going to be stuck for a while. Not a great idea, because what that could then result in is those faster riders just not using this altogether because they're too worried about getting stuck behind a slow cyclist and just using the road. So really like that they've tried to maximize this bicycle lane to facilitate that overtaking opportunities and not just create this kind of tunnel effect where there's nowhere else to go. It's only this. I'll do a brief description of the protected bicycle lane in case you're not familiar with it, but the way historically we have constructed our cross sections, or the way that we've built our road network, is would have the footpath and then a curb and channel that leads down onto the carriageway. The space directly adjacent the curb and channel has traditionally been the parking lane. Adjacent the parking lane is traditionally where you've got your bike riders, and then you'd have the traffic lane. Now, the issue with this approach is you've got riders that are traveling in the dooring zone. And I'm sure you've heard that term, riders traveling in the dooring zone. Very, very uncomfortable to be riding in there because you can't make that eye contact with drivers that could be exiting their vehicle, and you're not sure if the door's just going to swing open in front of you. So it's quite a stressful space to ride. But the other disadvantage associated with the traditional way of constructing bicycle lanes is you've also got riders adjacent the live traffic lane. So let's just say you do have a vehicle that's trying to access a car park. They have to cross over the bicycle lane, or you've got a vehicle that is just straying out of their lane. They could be distracted. They could be changing the music on the radio, or looking around at the kids in the back seat, or whatever it is. It's just that moment, movement away from the traffic lane, and they're directly in the bicycle lane. So there's significant disadvantages associated with conventional bicycle lanes. The protected bicycle lane really swaps this arrangement. And it says, riders, you're going to have a separated treatment. It's going to be adjacent the curb and channel next to the footpath. You're going to have some separation. So when I refer to separation, what I mean is this part here, that kind of buffer will be dependent on specific characteristics, what I'll talk about in a moment. And then the parking lane gets pushed further out there. So as a rider, you don't have to deal with the doors opening, and you don't have to deal with the live traffic in these types of scenarios. So very, very fond of these. And for both the perception of safety, it feels more comfortable to ride in these environments, but also the actual statistics will tell you that these are safer. You won't have as many crashes occurring. The City of Melbourne actually did conduct a study just to get some of that qualitative understanding of how riders felt in different environments. And for a protected bicycle lane, around 83% of respondents said they feel confident to ride in there. Okay, so that's a range of demographics. It's not just the highly capable, skilled bike riders. It's everyone from mums and children and everything like that. 83%, it's going to suit them. Like, they feel comfortable riding within that space. And when we're thinking about trying to create cycling corridors or cycling highways, and we're trying to attract high levels of cycling activity, we really should be providing the infrastructure that we know is attractive for them, which is things like protected bicycle lanes. So it definitely meets the kind of community expectation. If we compare that to a more conventional painted lane, we've only got 22% of people that feel confident riding in that space. So it is a stressful experience. And you can see it's much more comfortable to have that protected facility. Once again, a good kind of mantra is when you are designing or planning these types of things, to have in your head of, would someone who is aged between 8 to 80 be able to use this facility? That's generally what you'd want to consider for a cycling corridor. It's pretty unlikely most of us here would feel comfortable with an 8-year-old riding on a painted lane in the Doring zone like that. It's not a safe environment. Protected lanes, much safer. Okey-doke. So 2 main configurations for protected bicycle lanes. One involves, well, what we're seeing here, which is a one-way path. And it's basically just a symmetrical cross-section. So we just have a look. We've got footpath. We've got the protected bicycle facility. We've got the separator that is being installed there. Parking lane, traffic lane. That is then mirror imaged on the other side of the carriageway. So the riders in those protected bicycle lanes, they can only travel in one direction. So it's unidirectional or one way, a few terms out there. They travel in the same direction as the adjacent traffic lane. This arrangement is a lot easier to understand from both the cycling perspective and also drivers who may be new to the area. And it's probably the more common approach to investigate this. Okay, so this is what a one-way facility looks like. Just a real photo of, what this could look like. And I'll throw a question out to the group. We can see that we've installed some separators here. See, there's another one further in the distance. But my question is, why do you think a little break has been incorporated into those separators? So why would we have a gap in the separator? I'll give you 20 seconds to have a think through that one. And I'll check in with Ainsley and Marissa if there's any questions.
We are all good in the Q&A at the moment. Thanks, Max.
Thanks, Ainsley. All right, I can see lots of consistent answers coming through there. And yes, it is correct that the reason that we would be putting gaps in the separator is for drainage. For those not familiar with that, if the gap wasn't there, you would have a build-up in, runoff water or rainfall that would just puddle there, creating a bit of an issue for the parked vehicles or potentially for the traffic lane as well. One option would be, provide that separation consistently, but then you'd have to install new pits, so new side entry pits, and then dig under the surface there and tie into the existing drainage line. Very expensive activity. Much easier outcome is just to provide those gaps in the separators so that the runoff water can still head to your existing drainage line. So that's the reason that you would see those gaps there. The other configuration that you may see with protected bicycle lanes is a bidirectional path. And as the name suggests, this is where travel in both directions is permitted. And generally, you just have it on one side of the carriageway. So this is asymmetrical in this example. We've got the protected bicycle facility. We've got the separator there, parking lane, traffic lane, and then nothing on the other side for cycling facilities. So this is an example of a bidirectional path. This can be quite useful in a number of scenarios. Most useful is if all the kind of attractions are on one side of the carriageway and there's no real desire line on the other side. And an example of that could be if you've got a strip shopping on one side and then on the other side is maybe, it seems like an unlikely land use, but maybe it's like a just open paddock, or it could be residential or something like that. And on the other side is where like the library is and the university and things like that. That may be a strong reason to be like, I'm just going to put the bicycle facilities on this side of the carriageway because I know that's where the demand is. And I'm therefore not introducing additional crossing movements. Another reason that you might go for the bidirectional path is because that side of the carriageway has less conflict points. So if on one side you've got, 25 driveways and on the other side you've got 2, well, it might be easier to manage all of those conflict points where there's only 2 as opposed to trying to sort out the other side as well. So if you're able to minimize conflict points, that's another strong argument for this type of facility. The final reason that you might go for this one is there's a slight space saving with it as well, because you are only introducing one separator. The previous example had the separator on both sides of the carriageway. This is only one separator. If your separator is about 1 meter in width, you can appreciate if you're trying to work within retrofit scenarios, the built environment, that 1 meter width is prime real estate. So it might be very challenging to try and get 1 meter and 1 meter on both sides of the carriageway. Something like this might work. An example here of the bidirectional facility. Another question for the group. And you'll see that the separator being used here is much narrower. My question is, why do you think in this example the separator is narrower? So the other one was, 1 meter, 1.2, 1.5 meters. All the previous examples much wider. All right, some good, great responses coming through. I certainly agree that, yes, it is a road width issue, just managing the carriageway width. Agree with that. More specifically, though, the kind of answer I was looking for there is, this is actually a through lane, so there's no parking permitted. We don't have the parking permitted, then we don't have the risk of a door opening. And therefore, we don't need to provide such a wide separator because we're not trying to house an open door with that separator. Okay? So because there's no parking provision here, it's a through traffic lane, we don't need to provide such a width there to house that opening door. Now, in a perfect world, of course, you provide as much width as possible, because if you're riding here and you've got a truck traveling in the opposite direction of you, it still feels very uncomfortable to be that close in kind of like a head-on or oncoming arrangement. It's very, very uncomfortable. So keep that in mind as well. But generally, separators can be narrowed when there's no risk of dooring. I've got a table here that kind of summarizes where the pros and cons of either the one-way protected facility or the two-way bidirectional facility. Too much writing on a screen for me, for my liking. So I'm just going to chat through this in a more general sense with some examples. Before I get to that, though, just a note to say that, yeah, if you like your cycling little tidbits, by all means, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. I like to post random little snippets every now and then. The one that's actually shown in this slide is just got to do with how you can manage if you've got bidirectional facility on one side of an intersection, and then the other side of the intersection, it moves to a one-way facility. So that's just one example. Anyhow, that's just a random little plug. Few things that I want to just make everyone aware of with regards to the bidirectional facility, and this refers back to the table that I just mentioned. These are kind of the disadvantages of bidirectional. And this carriageway is a one-way type of arrangement. And we've got this vehicle that is exiting, let's just say, a car park. Okay. The bidirectional facility is clearly adjacent to that footpath there. The way that this situation tends to play out is the driver is focused on all of that one-way traffic, okay? So they're absolutely going to be paying attention to all of that traffic that's oncoming because they want to pick a gap and enter that traffic stream. To some extent, riders traveling in that same direction could be seen. They might be slightly in the periphery, but more or less, they're in that general vicinity, and it's likely a driver exiting would see them and be sure to include them as part of their gap acceptance. That same kind of thinking, though, does not apply for riders in the opposite direction. So if you're riding adjacent that traffic flow, opposite that traffic flow, it's very unlikely that that motorist would actually be aware to look in both directions. And the reason for that is because it's atypical. It's not common. Unless you've got lots and lots of these facilities in your specific jurisdiction or along this specific corridor, it always looks like this. It may be very unfamiliar to people, and people that are exiting those types of driveways may not expect that they have to look right as well as left. So just something to be mindful of. I'm not saying that you can never do this type of treatment, but it's something that should be, I guess, thought through. In a similar vein, that also applies for motorists that are turning right and entering a local street, or they could be entering a car park as well. So in this instance, I've got a right turning vehicle. It's trying to enter the local street there. They're definitely focused on the traffic stream. To some extent, they may notice riders that are also traveling in that opposing direction, but the riders traveling in the same direction as them that I've circled there in the yellow, incredibly unlikely that they would be able to see them and that they would be aware that they are there and they need to give way to them. So it creates those kinds of issues, those types of risks. One way that you can actually mitigate this risk in particular can kind of see it, is creating these little like hold bays, I guess you could call it. And it basically means as the vehicle is turning right, all they need to do is look for the gap in traffic, find the gap, do the right turn, and then they've got this additional space here where they can prop and wait, look left and right to see if there's any crossing cycling traffic before entering the local street or the minor league there. So basically trying to create two separate cognitive loads for that right turning motorist, as opposed to you got one chance to turn right and you got to look for everyone at that one point in time, because it's a lot for the driver to process. Okay, so just wanted to show you some different separator types, and this is a really wonderful example of, you know, what the separator may look like. This is an example of the kind of Copenhagen bicycle lane design, where you use, you know, relatively expensive materials to create that separation. So in this instance, we've got bluestone curbing as well as an asphalt infill. I just want to make everyone aware that this is absolutely fantastic, and, you know, certainly it's quite visually pleasing and all those types of things, but there are other options out there, because this is very expensive to do this kind of civil infrastructure, and just want to go through some other treatments available. Speaking of the separators, I'm going to just have a quick chat about our curb profile and how we may think about that during our detailed design of our protected bicycle lane. So for those that haven't heard of curb profiles or anything, I'll give you the quick 20-second rundown. So the curb profile that's probably most common is this kind of vertical face, which is referred to as a barrier curb. Anything that has like a chamfered edge or a beveled edge, something that's a little bit easier to get up on, that would be referred to as a semi-mountable curb. So those are the two main types that I'm going to talk about here. The general principle that we like to see is placing a barrier curb adjacent the parking lane, placing the semi-mountable adjacent the bike lane. So the semi-mountable is a more forgiving. And what I mean by that is, like, if you were to ride into semi-mountable curb, you're much more likely to stay on your bike as opposed to barrier. However, it has that same effect on vehicles. So if you put the semi-mountable on the parking lane side, it is much easier for that vehicle to then access the separator and to park on the separator. So just to go through these images that we've got below, the first one on the left-hand side is showing the barrier curb on both sides of the separator. So it gets the cross there because we don't like to see it on the bike lane side, but it does get the tick because it's on the parking lane side. The curb, the semi-mountable curb has been installed in the middle image for both sides of the separator. It gets the tick for the bicycle lane side, but the cross for the parking lane side. And then the final image is that best case scenario where you've got the forgiving curb profile on the bike lane side and the kind of much more rigid stay away from me curb, which is on the parking lane. And just to show you this kind of in practice, this is an example of a protected bicycle lane where both sides of the separator had that semi-mountable profile. And you can see super, super common and super easy for drivers just to mount the separator. Just another example of that. Now, the real, I suppose, limitation with this is the reason that you're installing this separator is so when this passenger side door opens, it does not swing into the bicycle lane. So you've got that cleared buffer. The easier it is for drivers to actually park on that separator, it reduces that buffer more and more and more, and then you've got the door actually opening into the bicycle lane, limiting its effectiveness. So really, really very nitty-gritty detail item there, but if you can put the barrier curb on the parking side, just really helps to reduce that one as a risk. Of course, you're going to get people like this who, deliberately disobey or, flout the laws. So this is someone that's parked in the bicycle lane itself. I wouldn't expect that's an accident. That is an intentional act there. Doesn't matter what curb you put there, you're going to get these people doing these types of things. But yeah, I just want to include that no matter which area you're working in, you're probably going to get some people that dislike this type of infrastructure, and have a think about how you could manage these types of scenarios. Marissa.
Hey, lots of questions on this one. If you've got a minute to answer some.
Hit me up.
Why are all Copenhagen's curb profile no semi-mountable on bike side?
It's a good question. I would say, and feel free if anyone knows drainage better than me, I suspect barrier curbs do a better job with managing all of that runoff water. So it could be a drainage consideration that barrier curbs have been adopted instead of the semi-mountable. The other reason that it may be adopted, so this is that same site, you can see the semi-mountable on both sides. Some product manufacturers may not have a transition that goes from this semi-mountable to the barrier, and that would also limit some of those designs that I've just spoken about, because there's no way they can connect the two. If you're doing in-situ pouring, that's not as much of an issue because you can manage that. But yeah, that's likely the reasons I would expect that you don't always get to see the semi-mountable on the kind of protected bicycle lanes.
Yeah. Okay. And is there any information or evidence on semi-mountable curb profiles leading to antisocial cycling behaviour?
I've never seen any research within that space, so nothing that I'm familiar with.
Okay. Just one more for now. If there is no parking permitted, would you still look for the curb profile to still be a barrier curb?
Most likely, depending on the speed and things like that. So if you still want to make sure that you're providing that separation, and if an errant vehicle is starting to stray towards that separator, you want to make sure that they know they're kind of hitting something and that they're about to enter the cycling space, which the barrier curb would do. So I think there's a pretty strong argument to say that you would still adopt that profile.
Great. Thanks, Max.
Yeah, no worries. The other note I wanted to make was just regarding if you're doing any of these protected bicycle lanes and they are adjacent disabled car parking bays, really have a good think about how you're going to manage that connectivity, because I'm sure you can all understand we cannot just be providing the separator going through those areas. People with mobility issues would be presumably accessing those bays, and it's unreasonable to expect that they could safely access those locations if they're forced to walk up onto a curb separator or walk down off it. So you don't want to create those separators all the way through that area. You want to create that gap. The other really, really important consideration here is ensuring that there is a nearby place for those people to be accessing the footpath. You don't want people, you know, with disabilities having to walk or travel up the bicycle lane to then find a pram ramp or a curb ramp to access the adjacent footpath. You want to make it as close as possible for them to avoid the risk of any collisions there. The other thing that I do like about this instance, yeah, it's just once again highlighting where that conflict point is. It's a really good tip that you could also provide this as a bit of a zebra crossing, so that priority is actually awarded to people accessing those bays, and bike riders need to slow down there. Got a not so good example of this. I might just zoom in on the image itself. So you can see that is what I was referring to about putting the zebra crossing across the bicycle lane, which I'm all for. I think that can work quite well, because it's quite readily understood. People understand that that's an area where they need to slow down and give way. But what's not so good about this example is if you were trying to access the adjacent bus stop and you were a person in a wheelchair, a mobility device, or you had some physical disability, it's not great that you have to walk kind of down to get to the bicycle lane level and then step back up to get to the bus stop. So you want to make sure that you've got those curb ramps there, so that there's safe, equal access for all users in this area. Yeah, and you're not discriminating at all. The other thing that I suppose you could look at in this example is you could really just try and raise the bicycle lane up and create as a wombat crossing. So kind of like a speed hump for riders, meaning that if you were crossing here, that's all at one level for you now. So that would be one flush level, and riders are having to force to go up a ramp, which will slow them down, making them even more likely to actually stop and give way to anyone crossing there. So something else that could have been explored in that environment. And I'll have a chat through some different separator types. So this is similar to the example that we looked at before, where if you don't have the parking lane adjacent, you can have a narrower separation. And what we're seeing in this example, this device is actually just the precast concrete units. The way that they are installed is they get just taken off the truck and bolted down to the pavement itself. Super, super useful if you're toying with the idea of trying to, you know, implement some type of protected bicycle lane in a specific area, but you're not 100% sure how the community will feel about that. Well, this type of infrastructure lets you kind of trial that. So we've seen lots and lots of trials being used with bolt down style infrastructure. It's a lot cheaper to install. And if the community does come back and say, this is not at all appropriate, like the bike riders don't like it, those driving adjacent don't like it, pedestrians are tripping over it, this is just no good, no good. Much, much easier just to unbolt them, put them back on the truck, drive off with them, do your line marking again, and then opening it back up, you know, how it was prior. Much cheaper exercise than building that in situ, yeah, and potentially having to demolish something that's cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So really good tip for you there, really handy for trialing your infrastructure. It's pretty common to see planter boxes to be used as some separator treatments. One of the issues with the planter boxes, and we spoke about in the last module, is they can actually act as a bit of a pedaling risk, pedal strike. So particularly if it's on bends or something like that, you know, you can strike your pedal on those things. But perhaps more relevant is how are those things going to be maintained? Because they might look very pretty on day one once they've all been installed, and all the fresh plants are doing very well. But once winter comes, you know, and maybe there's been some disease outbreak there and things are dying and it doesn't look so pretty, or, you know, things are going the other way and it's just become an overgrown mess and you're getting lots of leaf litter and debris falling into the bicycle lane. There's a few things that you need to consider with planter boxes. I mean, I love the idea of greening our streetscapes, but it's not uncommon to see them kind of let them go wild, which can then have further impacts. So just be mindful of that. Anyone know where this photo was taken? This one has got a few planter boxes being installed and also just kind of a combination treatment using kind of those car park speed humps. Yep, it's not Tokyo. It is Auckland though. Well done. It's Federal Street in Auckland. And this is a little bit further up Federal Street here. And yeah, just kind of giving a bit of credence to what I was saying before is the maintenance impact. So like in this instance, you've got a planter box that appears to have been struck and now things are out of line and now you got soil that's on the carriageway. So someone's going to have to go out and look after all of that, and you know, it's going to involve either closing down the bike lane to get access to that or closing down the carriageway, and probably the bike lane is the one that's going to close, which is going to be a bit annoying. So yeah, just things to consider if you're looking at planter boxes. Another question for the group. Lots of questions today. I'm liking all the answers, so I may as well keep the ball rolling. This little separator is a cute little thing. Any idea what it's called? And I'll give you a clue. It is named after an animal. So what do you reckon we call this separator type? And yeah, pop your answers in the chat. I'll give you 20 seconds to have a go. Alrighty. I do really like the bumble bump. That's very cute. I see the bumblebee, definitely. I like the Slater bug as well. That's cute. Snail. Oh, that's cute. Or ladybug. But no, it's actually an armadillo. So that's what the armadillo looks like, in case you haven't been to the zoo lately. It's a good product in the sense that it's made of 100% recycled material. So if you're working on a project that has very, very strong sustainability goals, this is perhaps something you could look into. But I think my main detractor that we should really talk about is they are not very good at delineating the space. So in this example, this is the black and white variety. This one is called the zebra separator. And you can see it's so low to the ground. It just blends in with the surrounds very well, considering the adjacent pavement is black, the line marking is white. Super, super common to have vehicles driving straight over that. They just think they got a flat tire or something like that. They don't even know they've hit this type of thing. So really not that good at creating that separation. Not to throw any shade at this product, but I don't think it offers the same delineation as other products out there. But they have been installed. There's a few examples in Fremantle and Perth, and there's a project in Geelong that I've seen them used as well. But yeah, they just don't excite me as much as other examples. Paddles, flexible bollards, they do a much better job with that delineation. It's just easier for drivers to kind of see that physical separation. So there's a variety of different products that kind of provide this type of paddle. Some jurisdictions may not allow this, it should be noted, but yeah, generally has a similar kind of function to the bolt down arrangement that we looked at before, where it's just, you can quickly install these things and disassemble if required. This is an example of those flexible bollards installed in Melbourne. And this project was actually installed during the COVID. I sound like an old person saying that. The traffic lane was repurposed during the COVID, and was given to bicycle riders on both sides of the carriageway. So it's a very, very wide facility and a very, very good outcome for riders, because previously at this location, you kind of see on the other side, this is a bridge crossing, and it's just a super, super narrow footpath adjacent this location. Prior to this being installed, it was just no bicycle lane on road. Well, leading up to it, there was a bicycle lane. You get to this point, no bicycle lane, so riders kind of just expected to disappear. And then on the other side, there was a bicycle lane. Well, what ended up happening was riders would either be just mixing in with the traffic, going at 60, 70 kilometers per hour, or going onto the footpath where it's really, really narrow and commingling with pedestrians. Both terrible outcomes. This one was trialed during COVID, and it's still going strong, and it's just a much, much better outcome for riders there. Ainsley.
Yeah, Max, we just had a question. Do you just know where this location is? Street, suburb, that kind of information.
This one?
Yeah.
This is Heidelberg Road, in, I'm guessing, Ivanhoe. Oh, just south of Ivanhoe. Crossing over the Yarra River.
Perfect. Thank you.
No worries. Final bollard or separated treatment that I thought I'd show. Not a big fan of this one. This is basically just individual units. They do have that vertical element to it, which I think is quite good, but regularly hit these things. And it is actually adjacent a clearway. So at some times of the day, you do get people parking here. And this is not wide enough to house an opening door. It's only about 0.5 meter or something like that. So not a great fan of this as a solution. I don't think this quite hits the separation required in these instances. But just another example I thought I'd show you. I might pause there, Ainsley and Marissa, and give everyone a 3-minute break, and we can get stuck back into it in 3 minutes. I'll check with Ainsley and Marissa if there's any questions I've missed during the break.
All good at the moment, Max, but thank you for providing that Google link for us.
Pleasure. Anything from Marissa?
We're all good.
Alrighty, let the party continue then. And we can have another little activity. What's wrong with this photo? So we've got Ken looking very confused there. Wonderful mustache. The bristles there. Why do you think Ken is looking confused? What's wrong with the photo? You let me know in the chats. Awesome. Okay. Good commentary being made. Yes, I agree. The line marking looks a little bit odd. No buffer or anything like that with the bicycle lane, but certainly the risk I'm thinking of here is that dooring risk. So being forced to ride in that dooring zone is very, very uncomfortable. And this is what the majority of our bicycle network looks like. You can see that this rider in particular is probably quite experienced because they've positioned themselves further away from the dooring zone. Actually quite common for riders that have been riding for a while to bring themselves closer to the traffic lane because they're so afraid of the door. So you can see that they're not actually riding directly in the middle of the lane. They're over further to the traffic lane. Also well done to the person that picked up that we've got some other users in the bicycle lane. We've got a skateboarder there and the scooter rider as well. So very impressive vision by that person. But yes, the dooring is certainly the considerable risk there. The dooring width around 1.2 meters. So the door can reach out approximately 1.2 meters. So we tend to design our separators with that in mind and go for 1.2 meters or 1 meter or 1.5 because we want to make that separator as wide as an open door. Doesn't always work like that, but that is yeah, just a general rule of thumb. It's actually a little bit, I suppose, this is one of my theories, ironic that the way that we've traditionally constructed our cross-section of our roads and streets is we've got the parking lane and then we have a bicycle lane, which is 1.2 meters, and then the traffic lane. I think it's a bit coincidental that the bicycle lane happens to coincide with the width of the car door opening. So perhaps that was just a facility for the car door. And then they're like, oh, wait, we were going to put bikes. Let's just put them there. So that's just one of my random conspiracies. But generally, on-road bicycle lanes are about 1.2, which is coincidentally the same width as an opening door. I've actually got this video of Ken riding, and this is me riding in front of him. I'm using the 360-degree camera, so I've just switched around the lens, so the vision is facing behind me as I'm riding. And Ken was involved in this near miss with a door opening. Ken was doing the right thing, wearing a nice bright top, cycling within the lane there, and then the door just opening in front of him. And he was lucky enough to be able to avoid that collision because there was no adjacent traffic, and so able to just enter that traffic stream. Sure, you can appreciate if that space wasn't available, how that could have played out. Another example of this is a much more dramatic near miss, and it is a near miss, so that there isn't a collision, but probably give you some further appreciation of why the dooring risk can have such significant impacts. So in this scenario, the dooring has occurred and the person is able to survive that. However, the secondary action, which is falling into the live traffic stream, can have incredibly serious outcomes. So just be mindful that it's not always just the first collision with the door, but any of those secondary consequences that we need to be mindful of. Vic Roads a few years ago did actually complete a study to analyze different dooring collisions and what type of crash types are occurring and things like that. One of the ones where I'm not really sure how valuable this money was spent doing this study. I reckon I could have had a good guess at this one. But anyway, may as well chat through it. 75% of dooring collisions occurring on the driver's side. It's pretty unsurprising considering most of our bicycle lanes are situated exactly there. And also because if you've got a parked vehicle, you're definitely going to have a motorist on that side of the vehicle because there's going to be a driver. So it's not surprising that we're seeing the majority there. But in saying that, I guess it is surprising to see that a quarter of those dooring collisions are still occurring on the near side, on the passenger side. The reason that you might see these types of collisions, I'll just give you a scenario of where this could be occurring. If you've got a taxi and they're just about around the corner from dropping off their clients at their hotel or whatever, the client says they're stopped at the lights. The client says, don't worry, just drop me off here. Thanks for everything. Chucks them the money. The client then opens the passenger side door, completely oblivious as to whether there's a bicycle lane there or not. And that's where that collision can happen. So during that kind of filtering activity by a rider and doors swinging open in that space, that's when you can have that passenger side collision. But certainly the predominant side is the driver's side. Within that same guidance documents, there is some information regarding what type of treatments may be appropriate in different road use classifications. Now, it's probably not a term that we use anymore within industry. We're more within the movement and place space or road network plans or anyway, the hierarchy of your streets and things like that. But it's still applicable in terms of the principles, and it's basically saying, like, if this is a predominant bicycle route or it's a predominant freight route or whatever, what type of treatments may be appropriate to reduce the risk of dooring. The most important thing to note is in all of those scenarios, one-way protected lanes, two-way protected lanes, off-road paths may be appropriate. They should be investigated because there's just such safety benefit associated with that. So it's worth keeping an open mind there. Just wanted to show you this trial that was undertaken about 10 years ago now. This is on Glenferrie Road in Melbourne. And a bit tough to see, but the green conflict paints has not been extended all the way over the bicycle lane. Instead, this kind of narrow strip has been installed. It's not because they ran out of paint. They were actually deliberately doing this because they were trying to encourage riders to ride further away from the dooring zone. So rather than position themselves in the middle, use this green strip to help locate where you should be. What I find baffling about this as an approach is you're basically communicating to riders that you are safer riding closer to the live traffic lane and closer to the trams or the light rail than you are in the parking area, which is just boggling that like we're willing to accept this level of risk for riders, basically. In saying that, there was an evaluation of this treatment, and there was a note to say that riders were shifting over, so they did achieve the project objectives. Also, motorists were shifting over. So motorists were getting closer to the centre line to give those riders additional space as they overtook them. Amazingly, as part of this evaluation, 75% of cyclists interviewed said that they felt more comfortable with this green stripe than what was there before, which was just the bicycle lane, which I am quite astonished about. So this, trial, it still exists. It still looks like this on Glenferrie Road, but by no means do I consider that the best practice and the best case outcome for this road. I think we should still definitely be going for separated facilities, because you definitely see a higher result there for those safety metrics. This one is out of New Zealand, across the ditch there, in Hastings, and basically just tried to think about how we can communicate to drivers that this bicycle lane is, continuing. What they've opted for was painting these dashed green lines. It's not actually meant to be utilized in the way that we're seeing here, where your riders are meant to ride on those green lines. That's just coincidence with this photo. The way that it was set up was like the green lines are a constant reminder to drivers in the traffic lane adjacent that that's a bicycle lane. So rather than fill all of that space up with green, save a bit of money and just do dashed lines. I'm also not convinced that this would offer many safety benefits. I haven't seen the evaluation for this treatment, but I wouldn't expect that you would see a significant reduction in trauma or a significant perception of my safety feels much better because of these green dashed lines. But just want to make everyone aware of some of the trials that have been undertaken within this space. Nothing too, massive, I guess. If we are talking about improving the on-road cycling facility, though, one thing that we can do is provide buffers. So the most common way that's achieved is through pavement markings. So these are referred to as chevron pavement markings. And in this example, you've got a double chevron. So you've got a chevron that's been installed on the parking side and a chevron that's installed on the traffic lane side. You're basically just creating additional room. So if the door opens, you've got more space there to get around that. Or if a vehicle is straying out of their traffic lane, there's more space for them to correct before they enter the bicycle lane. So it's just about providing that buffer. There's just some dimensions if you're interested in some of the specifics of those treatments. If you don't have the space to do the buffer on both sides of the bicycle lane, you might be having to think about, well, which side would offer a better outcome for riders. This example, we can see that the chevron or the buffer is installed adjacent the parking lane. But of course, you could have done it the other way and put the buffer adjacent the traffic lane side. Bit of guidance around this, and I'll definitely take this with a grain of salt, but in the City of Melbourne bike lane guidelines, this is what's offered. If there are parking restrictions in the parking lane, then it's inferred that there's a high turnover, a relative high turnover of traffic. So say you've got a 2-hour parking zone, you know you're constantly going to get vehicles turning over, which means you're constantly having a door open into the adjacent cycling facility. So where there is the timed parking, those are scenarios where you'd be prioritizing a buffer on the parking lane side. Okay. Once again, just some dimensions for you. Conversely, if you're going into a space where it could be all-day parking, you're not having that same turnover, not expecting the same number of doors opening, that's when the buffer could be implemented on the traffic lane side. Once again, I'll say just take that with a grain of salt. If I was to take my own anecdotal experience and bias, I would say always do it on the parking lane side, because I am much, much more nervous about a driver opening their door than I am about a car that's behind me potentially straying out of their lane or not seeing me. I think it's much more likely to be colliding with a door than that type of impact. But that's the guidance that's out there. So if you do need to refer to anything, that's going to help provide that evidence, I guess. The exclusive bike lane, so it's just basically an on-road bicycle lane, but it's just being maintained all the way through. We see lots of these in our high-speed networks, 60, 70, 80 km/h roads with this type of infrastructure, which is just really not appropriate. I think it's a bit of a hangover from the past that we need to provide for riders. We're going to put them on the carriageway, but in those high speeds, you should be looking to separate or get them off-road. It's just far too fast. My other thing with exclusive bike lanes is if you've got the kind of commitment to create a separate facility all the way through the mid-block or the segment, and you're willing to, carve out that space on the carriageway for that user, there must be some type of separation treatment that can also be installed just to help mitigate the risk of errant vehicles accessing that lane. So strongly encourage you, if you are working on projects with exclusive bike lanes, can you put some type of separator treatment to bolster that? So it's much more obvious that there's separate facilities. The final one is a wide curbside bike lane. Not a fan of these at all. They are still within our standards. So you've probably seen these types of things before. It's basically just a wide left lane. Every 200 meters, you see this ... and then a bicycle symbol, and then nothing. And then another 200 meters, ... bicycle symbol. Doesn't achieve much, in my opinion. Also, they are installed in high speeds. Once again, this example is 80 km/h. Really not an appropriate treatment. You can also see like the crest on the hill there, and the fact that the road is kind of bending, curving. It's very, very difficult to be able to see riders that are traveling at pretty slow speed because they're going up a really steep hill. And you're traveling at 80, it's just a very poor example of bicycle infrastructure, this one. So yeah, not a big fan of those type of treatments. I much prefer the exclusive bike lane if you're going to have to do on-road, but even better, some degree of separation there. We have talked about a lot of treatments, and I just wanted to do a quick mention of this resource. So this is the Global Street Design Guide. So Global Designing Cities Initiative is about 40 plus countries from around the world. Australia was involved, New Zealand, US, Canada, parts of Asia, parts of South America, all came together, said, what's going on in our countries? What's being installed for cycling, and also pedestrians and things like that. And then kind of cherry picked what are kind of the best case scenarios. Very, very useful document, not just because of all that information, but the way that it is displayed is very digestible. So I've just taken a snip here of, you know, what they refer to as a protected cycle track, what we've been calling protected bicycle lane. And it's got some metrics, just generic, you know, how does that impact on safety, comfort, what's the space, what's the cost? Also bidirectional, also raised, all these different ideas. You've got a whole resource sheet with all these different typologies that can help you, I suppose, remember what type of cycling infrastructure does exist and also how effective they are. We don't actually have this downloaded and saved on our LMS page. Instead, we provided a link on our LMS so you can download it directly from them. The reason is they make you sign up because they like to know who's downloading this resource. They like to know what industry you're from and what part of the world. So we haven't posted it ourselves, but definitely worth the download. Yeah, the only annoying bit is it's like 300 meg. It's a really big document, but lots of good stuff in there. I wasn't involved in the writing of that, and I'm not paid to say that either. I just think it's very, very good. All right, before I get into mixed traffic, I'll just check in with Marissa and Ainsley to see if there's any questions that have popped up in the Q&A or chat.
Ainsley, you go first.
Yeah, so I was just going to go through the one in the chat, Marissa. I think the one in the Q&A we can answer pretty easily. But yeah, we've had one that's come through in the chat, Max, to say that you've provided a few examples of compliant designs which aren't desirable, such as that wide curbside bike lane. So are there any design guide improvements which seek to address these to make active transport a more attractive option for users?
Are there any design guide improvements which seek to address these? I think it's predominantly dependent upon the project team that's looking after this and the way that they investigate those types of corridors and what they perceive as the level of risk associated with that. I'm not aware of any programs out there that are trying to, you know, effectively tackle these as like these are high risk areas on our network, the wide curbside as an example, and what are we doing about that? I haven't heard of any jurisdiction that's going with that. The way that you would, you know, kind of go from having a facility like that to something that's a little bit better is most likely reactive, either feedback from the community that this needs to get improved, yeah, complaints. Hopefully you're not getting this, but you might have trauma that's occurring there, and there's the question mark about why is this infrastructure out there. Generally, it's done in a reactive manner, but if you are looking at like strategic cycling corridors, or you know the most important areas of the network that, you know, need to be connected for riders, that's an opportunity for you to be more proactive because you'd be able to recognize where are the weak parts on that journey. If some of those journeys look like that wide curbside, that's a pretty good indication that you should be upgrading that and yeah, starting to get better things out there.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Max. I think a lot of the treatments that we've been through today, where they can be retrofitted, are some good ideas of how we can change that alignment on the road as well to make it safer for cyclists.
Thank you very much, Ainsley. All right, I'll keep on going. So mixing traffic, this scenario, what it involves is basically giving riders the green tick to be able to claim the traffic lane, basically use the traffic lane like any other vehicle, So they don't have to be pushed to the curb side. They can just go straight in the middle. The example that I've got on the screen is not an example of mixed traffic, but a perfect case study for where it could be implemented. I used to ride this to get to work. You can kind of see, if you've got incredible vision, in the distance, there's a little ... bicycle symbol. So it is designated as kind of a cycling corridor, and it does have lots of east-west connection there. But the way that it actually functions is riders are forced to go incredibly close to the dooring zone because the traffic behind them want to continue in this space. So this is a really, really bad example of where you're just trying to fit in all these modes and really putting riders in a perilous situation because they get squeezed into the dooring zone, and if the door opens, there's no buffer whatsoever, and if the vehicle happens to stray out of the lane, there's no buffer whatsoever into that cycling space. So it's a really, really bad example of, I suppose, what's currently out there, but a prime opportunity where you could actually advocate for a mixed traffic environment. And what that would involve would be this rider no longer riding there, but just positioning himself. I'm okay to be here. I'm going to ride in the middle of the traffic lane. That is absolutely what I'm being told to do by the surrounding infrastructure and things like that. And I think that's a good opportunity for this kind of infrastructure. To bring it back a step, just so we're aware of what we're talking about here, when we are considering mixing traffic or lane sharing, we're talking of speeds less than 40 kilometers per hour. And when I say less than 40, I mean 30, because it's not including 40. So it's very low speeds. And the reason for that, I'm not sure I've got a blank slide at the end here. I do. Good. The reason that we're saying that we want those speeds so low is, I'm going to draw out a little graph. Some of you may have seen this before, and that's okay. I like drawing graphs. Along the y-axis, I'm going to have the probability of a fatality occurring. So the probability that the collision will be fatal. And along the x-axis, I'm going to have the speed in kilometers per hour. The collision speed the graph that I'm going to show here is the interaction between a vehicle, motor vehicle, that collides with a cyclist, okay? So the relationship with this type of interaction looks something like this. I'm going to exaggerate it, but it's basically saying at very low speeds, it's very unlikely that we're going to see a fatal incident if the driver collides with a cyclist. Around this point here, we can see things get exponentially worse. So there is like a turning point where it's like low risk, low risk, low risk. Things are significantly getting worse. So it's becoming more likely that as those speeds get higher, we're going to see the death of a rider there. And the speed at which that occurs is 30 kilometers per hour. So if that collision speed is greater than that 30 mark, the risk of the fatality exponentially increases. And so that's the reason that we aim for that 30-kilometer operational speeds for the lane sharing, for the use of those mixed traffic examples. So less than 40 kilometers per hour, we've got the lane sharing. Anywhere between 40 to 60, we should be looking at relocation of parking, separated bicycle lanes. But anything above that is basically off-road. It's just too fast, not going to be a comfortable experience. We should be moving things off-road. These are all aspirational. I know that we do not have a network that looks like this, but going forward, this is what we should be taking as, I guess, our benchmark. The way that our mixed traffic areas are actually demarcated is through the use of these fellows. These are called SHAROs. It stands for shared arrows. It is a pavement marking device that communicates to riders, okay, I can now claim the traffic lane. And it also communicates to motorists that, okay, I can expect to see riders traveling in the middle of the traffic lane. Now, fully acknowledge not everyone in our community knows what that symbol means. Possibly people in today's conversation are not aware of that either, and that's okay. It's our job, is now that we do know what this means, that we tell everyone we know, and at our next, bowling party, we be sure to bring up the idea of SHAROs and the reason that it's used. A couple months ago, my mum, she called me because she saw these symbols installed just a few streets away from where she lives, and she said, "What's going on here? Is this a bicycle spot only, and I'm not allowed to drive here anymore?" And I had to explain, no, it just means bike riders can claim the middle of the traffic lane now, and you've got to be aware that they're going to be using that space, and they're not just going to be on the curbside anymore. And, if you can convince my mum, then I'm sure we can convince the broader community. But definitely needs to be some improved kind of media around that to make sure that, there's a wider understanding of what that is. Here's a good example of the SHAROs in use. This is in the city of Yarra, where they've kind of adopted a 30km/h area speed zone. Speed zones are always more than just the sign. You've got to make sure that you've got the environment that feels like you should be going at a lower speed. Generally, the way that's achieved is through local area traffic management treatments, which we'll speak to in a second. It's not just the metro areas, though. This is a photo taken in Warrnambool, which is in Western Victoria, kind of an hour away from the South Australia border. They've also adopted a 30km zone in their CBD there. And they've adopted the SHAROs use in this environment as well, because when they were doing, the reconfiguring what the CBD could look like, there was, of course, an opportunity to provide protected bicycle lanes and maintain speeds as is, but it's quite a lot of money if you're moving around curb and channel, particularly if you're doing streetscape improvements. It's a lot of capital infrastructure. Instead, they went with the approach of, we'll just drop the speeds. We're going to put raised roundabouts and raised intersections and things like that, so that there's kind of this gateway into the CBD as well. And we're going to include SHAROs in there. So it's not a separate facility. It's going to just be included as part of that. Works very well. Very, very exciting out of Warrnambool there. This one is the SHARO flower. This one is in Portland, Oregon. Not Portland, Victoria, Portland, Oregon. They're very, very fond of using the SHAROs. Back in the 90s, Portland, Oregon made the decision that they are going to be a bicycle haven. They're going to kind of position themselves as the best place in America. And since then, they've, tripled their daily bicycle journeys from those kind of early policy strategic direction. Not all of their infrastructure is protected. In fact, a lot of it is on local streets. They call it the green neighborhood ways or something like that. And it's basically, if you've got an arterial corridor, right, that's where the general traffic is going to go. That's where your buses is going to go. I'm not going to touch that. That's actually really hard to interact and play with. Instead, I'm going to take the adjacent parallel route, which is local streets, and I'm going to let the bicycle traffic dominate that space. So they've got lots and lots of sharrows on this local network, and the way that they manage the rat running is they just close off the intersection to general traffic every few blocks. So if you're trying to drive and get through on the local streets, you're continually forced back onto the arterial because that's your space. This space is for the riders, right? And also local residents there. Really, really good solution and something that you should be thinking about there. So they're very, very fond of the sharrows over in Portland. Where you wouldn't want to see them is in an example like this, where we've actually got the sharrow in place in the middle of that light rail or tram track. And the reason we don't want to see that is because we don't want riders crossing the light rail or tram track at acute angles. We want to see that crossing occurring at an angle between 70 to 90 degrees, because we know that tires can easily get caught in those things. So this one, it's the big cross. I can confirm that only lasted about 3 weeks before the local bicycle user group complained and got scrubbed off, but definitely don't want to be see them installing in those locations. Spoken a few times about this idea of local area traffic management treatments. For those that do work within council, you're probably very familiar with this terminology, but for those that haven't, it's just traffic calming devices, things that make vehicles slow down, things that make them feel like they have to operate at lower speeds. So speed humps or speed cushions are a really, really common way to deal with this. Why I like this one in particular, this one's in Adelaide. Your bike riders, they get a bypass facility. They don't have to deal with the hump, whereas your drivers, it's just like a one-way point as well as the raised point. So they definitely have to slow down. It makes it a less attractive route for drivers to have to take. So potentially through the installation of these things, you're also bringing down traffic volumes through there as well. Another example of that, this one's in New Zealand, that kind of bypass treatment so riders don't have to deal with the raised hump there. What I spoke about in the Portland example is blocking off traffic so that they're unable to use the local streets for their own rat run. Really, really good idea. So can also be referred to as a modal filter because it's filtering out a specific transport mode, which is vehicles. Bit difficult to see on this image, but if I look at the aerial, you might get a better appreciation of what's going on here. This one's called like a partial kind of modal filter, where a vehicle that did want to travel south or continue through, they theoretically could, but they have to perform that kind of movement. Whereas a bike rider, they can travel straight through. They are not being hampered at all. The disadvantage with this particular setup is, well, you've now just introduced 2 conflict points that were otherwise not there. So there is a disadvantage with this approach. What you'd actually ideally like to see is the detour being much more dramatic. So forcing that vehicle to go much, much further, perhaps direct them all the way to an arterial so that they can't just quickly go in and out. It's a much better outcome there. This is an example of a full closure. I'll go straight to the aerial as well. You've got the bike rider that's able to head straight through, whereas general traffic have to turn around and go and find their own traffic network because this is not set up to facilitate their movement. This is to facilitate bike riders and to improve their journey and their safety there. So really, really strongly recommend that kind of treatment if you're looking at implementing Sharrows and trying to implement those kind of mixed traffic environments. Alrighty, so that's the end of the content for today. I welcome questions as they're still coming through, but I did want to go through the quiz as well, just so that you're all on top of the coursework as well. Few notes though, if you are bringing your bicycle facility to an off-road, on-road area, make sure that there are no barriers in place that would really disrupt that movement. But also something that I think is really important to remember is if you've got any temporary traffic management schemes, or you're reviewing any of those plans, really have a good think about how the cycling connectivity is being managed. It's very, very common to see those temporary traffic management signs just being installed in the bicycle lane, rendering them ineffective. Like, you cannot use that anymore, and you're now forcing riders into the traffic lane. So really have a good think about where that positioning is going to occur, and ensuring that there's sight lines so that riders can see if there's any obstacles or anything like that. Perhaps even implementing detours and things like that. Common oversight. Okay. Go back to our LMS now. Thanks to those who have already said a quick hello in the introductions. Lovely to hear where you're all dialing in from and your background and experience. So if you haven't had a chance yet, by all means, feel free to contribute there. The Global Designing Cities Initiative that I just mentioned before, that resource, that one's available there. So if you click on that, that will take you to the website where you can download it straight off them. They also gave us a little video because they're super passionate about this space as well, and you're welcome to watch that video. Just give some additional context about the work that they do. We're of course doing module 2 now, and module 2 has got 2 components once again. We've got a 360-degree video, so we'll get you to watch that before our next session. It's only 5 minutes or so, so you've got a chance to watch that at the end of today's module. We've also got a quiz. So if you click on module 2 quiz, it's a little bit different to the first one. And I'm going to have to continue my attempts. Let's see what happens. I'll go back to question 1. So question 1 is saying, please review York Street, Launceston on Street View. So very conveniently provided you a link. So what we'll get you to do is basically grab the little Street View fellow, drop him down on York Street, and just have a quick look around and do a little drive up and down York Street. The kind of extents that you're looking at are in between George Street up here and goes all the way down. I can't remember actually. Maybe Margaret Street. Just that kind of mid-block section there. We'll get you to have a look at that, because what we want you to answer is, how does the existing environment along York Street cater for cyclists? So that's question 1. Pretty straightforward. I'll go to the second question, where we've got another another file that we'll get you to have a look at. And this is an actual design. It's proposed for York Street, and we want you to just do a little bit of a review here. So the first thing that we'll just make a note of is we're giving you this design purely as an activity, and we don't want you to go out and start talking to reporters or talking to MPs about your own personal opinion of this. We just want you to do this as an exercise. So please keep that in mind if you've got any strong feelings about York Street. Basically, there's only 4 sheets. you can have a look at what is being proposed along here. There's a legend. So if you've never reviewed design plans before, the legend's going to be a very good start for you, but I wouldn't say there's anything too troubling about this specific design. If you have any issues reading it, by all means, feel free to give us a buzz and we can chat through it. But you're basically just going to flick through these sheets and try and decipher, all right, well, what was there currently, what's currently existing, and what are they proposing? Maybe even just jot down some notes as you're going through it, just so you've got that background there. Next part of the quiz is going to be answering the questions associated with that design. Okay, so the first one is, how does the design cater for cyclists? And just a clue, you can pick multiple, and a further clue, there's 5. So you should be selecting 5. Few other questions. All of those are relevant to the conversation that we've had today. Once you've filed it all in, you just click on finish attempt and you'll get live feedback on how you went on that. So it's all saved there on the LMS. I don't think you'll have great difficulty accessing that, but by all means, if there's any issues, technical glitches, please let us know. We'll be happy to help out.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone has any final questions, pop them into the chat now. Otherwise, thank you very much, Max, and thank you, Ainsley, working hard in the background, answering everyone's questions. So thank you so much.
Excellent. So time now just to watch the video for module 2 and complete quiz 2 as well. And best of luck with it all. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Hope you have a lovely weekend.
Yes, great. See you, everyone.
Bye.